So we all knew the story about James Krause, that New Jersey had, their gaming commission had essentially told all the bettors in the state to ignore or not put bets or accept any bets where Krause was a fighter, coach, corner, you name it. And then, this was big, Ontario, the entire province in Canada, about 15 million people, I believe, told the same thing to its bettors there, no accepting or betting on any UFC bets altogether. And then on Friday, this is the new news, the Alberta Gaming, Liquor, and Cannabis Government Agency basically did the exact same thing. I looked up the population, BC, and it was about 5 million. So you have about 20 million Canadians who can't bet. You might be asking, how many Canadians are there? I believe Canada's about 33, 35 million people. So the vast majority of Canada is not allowed now to place bets on UFC action. On top of that, and this is the big part, BC, the UFC has basically said now, pending an investigation, in other words, they could reverse this in the future, we'll have to see. But as it stands right now, if you're at all training and involved with James Krause, yeah, you can't be fighting here. They're not going to allow it. Here, of course, is the quote. I'll pitch it to you after this, BC. Quote from UFC, from Hunter Campbell, their chief business officer. UFC has since advised Krause and the respective managers working with impacted fighters, those working with him at Glory MMA and Fitness, that effective immediately, fighters who choose to continue to be coached by Krause or who continue to train in his gym will not be permitted to participate in UFC events pending the outcome of the aforementioned government investigations. Further, UFC has released Derek Minner from the organization. BC, your reaction?
Look, we said this had the potential to be very big, to get very messy for those involved, and given that this is the first really major scandalous moment of any kind after this level of all-in embracing of betting from the UFC, from the networks, from everybody, whoever was going to go down first was going to get the Pete Rose, Joe Jackson treatment. They were going to get scapegoated. They were potentially going to get, taught a lesson. Look, it seems very much we are on that way. Minner getting cut, as you mentioned. Krause basically in a position right now, pending, we obviously want to give him the chance through this investigation, whatever, plays out afterwards, to have his say and give his side of the story. But where we are right now in the investigation, they're basically removing him from the sport. That's the direction this appears to be headed, and that is super serious. I mean, you want to talk about immediate fallout. Where does Brandon Moreno, the interim flyweight champion, go from here after recently joining camps there? You're asking a lot of people to restart their lives and careers, and you're going to see a few of them ending it here because of how serious this is. I mean, this feels just like the beginning. I haven't heard from Jay Paquette at all to see if Nova Scotia or Mount Unique in particular is going to adopt those same sanctionings. But look, this is just the beginning. You have that feeling. New Jersey making a bold move in the States. And once, look, UFC, you cannot say it enough. UFC, ESPN, Disney, DraftKings, I mean, everybody that's like associated remotely with this are just going to push them, whoever is involved, away and be as PNG to them as possible. If Krause doesn't have a good excuse here, and at this point where we're at, I fear for him and his future. He's going to go down hard from this, Luke. And you can say justifiably, I guess, but UFC putting in those sanctions to not allow fighters and their team members to bet was a smart move, and I think now we're sweeping out the mess that has come from after that. But is there any, port in the storm here for Krause and company, Luke, or anyone involved in this? It seems like they're going down hard.
Well, we have to see. We don't know what the investigations are going to yield. In other words, again, let me just imagine a scenario, because do BC and I know what James Krause did or did not do? We do not know. We don't know. We don't have any information, privileged or otherwise, about what the government has found or hasn't found. But in theory, let's imagine that he was involved in fight fixing, again, as a theoretical idea. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about banishment from the sport for life, and everyone associated with him will go down with it. On the other hand, if he was just using privileged information to bet, he could also be excommunicated, but that remains a little bit less clear. That's a bad thing. It's a real bad thing with regulators, but that's not nearly as bad as the potential other alternative. So, and by the way, if he didn't even do that, then this is all just sort of a temporary bump in the road, and he'll be back to normal. I don't think we're going to get back to normal with him, but that could be that. Two other things that you should consider, by the way, dead wronging myself. Canada, not 33 or 35 million, 38 million. And we're still talking about 20 million Canadians, though, who can't bet on UFC. So still over half of all Canadians cannot bet on UFC action.
Do you think 90% of Canadians live within 60 miles of the U.S. border, Luke? Probably, right?
Something like, yeah. There's not many who live remotely in British Columbia or something like that.
Yeah, or none of it. Yeah, the name says it all. There ain't none.
There was 2 points real quickly, BC, that we want to consider, and we'll get to the weekend's action. 2 points to consider. Number one, right, here's kind of the issue. It relates back to these injury reports. Now, we talked about, for example, when TJ Dillashaw fought at UFC 280, he and his team were very, very, very good, at least about concealing it. Not that wasn't a good thing for other reasons, but at least as it related to betting, nothing was abnormal there at all. And so you can imagine scenarios where it's no big deal. Fighters routinely come in injured and then disguise it from medical staff. But to the extent that anyone else who is not in control of this process gets information, the UFC doesn't like, for example, in the NFL, all of the people who work, like the trainers and all of the staff and everyone else on these teams, they're all employees. They can be very tightly controlled. There's a lot of just sort of ancillary auxiliary players here that the UFC cannot control, and that creates some problems long term. I don't really know how they're going to fix it. And then, of course, the other issue is just with concealing the injury and anyone else in close succession getting information and it also affecting betting lines. How does the UFC fix this problem? We articulated that something like that on Friday. Dude, it's not easy. This is a very difficult problem, I think, for UFC to solve. I'm sure they're working very hard with the regulators to make sure this goes away. It's a bit of a black eye for them. But nevertheless, just the way in which the sport is constructed based off this independent contractor model, it makes control that they need throughout the process that other sports leagues enjoy by virtue of employee versus independent contractor scenarios. The UFC doesn't enjoy that. And so how do you control that top-down process without it? I don't know. I guess we're going to have to see.
Here's how you control it, Luke. You control it with fear, meaning you nailed it. If Krause is involved in actual fight fixing, like, it's over for him. But I think even if it's just privileged information or maybe being a little bit too, I don't know, like, he's been very open about it. I know the interview clips that make the rounds when he was on Ariel's show, what was it, 2019, I think was the most recent time when he talked at length. You know, it was a couple of years ago, but it's still relevant and close enough where he's mentioning, you know, I make far more money betting on UFC than I do coaching or than I did fighting. He also said he trained under a longtime successful MMA gambler who's been banned by all the casinos because of the success he has. Like, all these things I think are going to come back to haunt James, where even if it's short of fight fixing, I still feel like he's going to take the hit aggressively to the fullest extent of the law so that it sets a precedence. Because you just made a great point. Well, you know, they're not employees, they're contracts. So how can you have it both ways for UFC? I think they're going to instill the fear through the sanctions and punishments that get handed out for those involved. And by the way, Minner just got canned. So I think that has to tell you that there's something wrong here. Because if there was a justifiable upfront explanation for the way that fight went down, you know, I don't know if he's getting let go and dropped from the company and dropped from the rankings. Seems pretty damning. You have to come down extra hard on whoever's remotely involved so that it's a message sent to fighters, managers, agents, coaches, whoever auxiliary that are involved in the periphery of this sport who have access to this knowledge, that if you publicly are showing that you're using that to great success betting, including the levels of a Discord and being very outspoken like Krause was and having a podcast about betting and all that, they're gonna want to cut those relationships and get you out of that right now, because here's the thing. I don't know at the end of the day in this situation if there was true impropriety. I don't actually know, but it would behoove the UFC to make sure that it never happens again by acting like there was with whatever information they have and building a wall right now, right in front of them and saying, you even are rumored to be caught up in this moving forward, you're going to have issues. I think that's the best way to do it without, you know, this whole debate of employee versus contractor. And I may sound very pro company here, but look, they have to be as aggressive as possible, because as you so, you know, rightfully indicated on Friday's show when we were sort of talking about, you know, this is financially bad for the UFC, but at the end of the day, if there is, you know, concern impropriety, that's going to be the biggest hit that they can take. They need to stomp that out. So look, seriously, anyone involved, I'm telling you right now, they're going down hard, Luke. They're going down hard.
My only response to the Minner news, people are like, oh, there must be something. Not necessarily. I think you kind of indicated with the way you explained it there, BC. Let me just echo that. Like, them cutting Derek Minner, to me, does not, I mean, of course, it could mean that they've already found something and then they got rid of him for it. That, of course, is on the table. But to me, even if they haven't found anything, just the fact that already this has caused this net effect, he's damaged goods to them. They were just like, no, like, first of all, we're just going to we're going to cut out any part of this equation that is even remotely involved at all, whether he's innocent or not. You're already under suspicion. That suspicion will never really truly fully go away. Goodbye. Right? Goodbye. So he could be totally innocent here. I want to point that out, but it doesn't really matter because once there is the appearance of impropriety, it's very, very hard to undo that. And by the way, we'll have to see if other promotions even want to sign him going forward. That's the other problem too. Like James Krause is in a hard way, Derek Minner's in a hard way by even at a bare minimum, the mere appearance of impropriety. So
right. And look, again, if Krause fixed the fight, dude, he'll get what's coming to him. But even if he technically didn't do anything wrong, he's in a potential position to have to get an entirely new career when his entire life, it seems, was building up to being where he is now. Talented ex-fighter, successful coach, has a presence, podcasting-wise in the sport and all that. I mean, that's tough. But Luke, what is UFC's history when things don't really, they got the fuck rid of Paul Daly, even if that was justified or not, right? They've dropped journalists left and right whenever there were situations. Look at even at Helwani and 199 and how that played out. They don't mess around and keep people close that they got suspicions about. So either way, Luke, they're going to have to make a big statement in how they adjudicate this. Would that be the right word? Because I did feel a little classy saying that.
Adjudicate, yeah, but I don't know what being shitty to the media has to do with that.
I'm saying the UFC in history just shuts people down. Fighters who they thought were tied up in something, you're gone. Miguel Torres, you're gone.
They don't want. I mean, again, everyone thinks this is about financial transactions, and it is. That's obviously a big part of it. But the real story here is that regulators in Canada are saying they can't trust whether UFC fights aren't fixed. That's what they're basically saying. They don't know if the product is legitimate, and therefore they're banning certain folks, obviously 20 million Canadians, basically, from taking bets on this. So that's the issue. But
but it's probably who are we banning really? Like Bronstetter and a couple retired hockey players, Luke?